we want to learn from history. The Ottomans, what I would say to answer that question, were they good or bad? But the question really is does anyone raise a sufficient mass of people in the world considering you to be the Khalif? Mm-hmm. That's why it's kind of like an obscure, an abstract question. But the fact is, it wasn't all roses and musk when it came to the Turco-Armenian relations of the 20th century. The general populace is very devout, and what matters to them is this man ruling by Islamic law?
All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the Sands of Time podcast. I am Tariq Ibrahim. I am with our chief historian, Mujir Mourning, and he has got an amazing story for us to share. But before we go into that, I just wanted to do a quick little recap about everything we talked about right now. And of course, Mujir is, he will give a better recap. I think it's important to talk about the couple of things that we've done over the past few episodes for you to know about. So first thing we talked about is the overall, what this show's all about, kind of like the pilot episode, if you will. So very rudimentary, we talked about what we're all about here. Then we talked about some of Mujir's favorite figures in history. He didn't get to one. He left that dangling for you guys, and maybe today we'll touch on that a little bit. But we talked about a couple of some really important historical figures. And then we followed up with the Umayyad dynasty and then the Abbasid dynasty. So these are the kind of things that we touched about so far. So if you want to see any of these segments, you have to go back into the previous episode. So if you go on our YouTube page, you'll see all the episodes over there. You'll be able to find them there. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, just subscribe and go, and you'll see the episode list right there, very easily and organized for you. And just pop on and listen. And if you like this show, please, please, please like, subscribe, and obviously tell your friends, because there is no way you heard the Umayyad dynasty episode and said to yourself, yeah, I heard this all before. So if you're looking for a brand new, not brand new because this is history, but if you're looking at a fresh take of history, something that you can apply to yourself, something that actually makes sense, something that is actually based on human beings, I think this is the show. What do you think?
Thanks so much for that. I think that's an important theme, though, is we're really trying to humanize history. As we said in the pilot, there's so many conversations out there about history where people are over-heroizing figures and canonizing them and turning them into saints. And there's this sense that you kind of have to do that in order to enjoy the work product of that person. And that's just not really helpful for people today. It's more valuable for people today to be able to see that flawed, often tragic figures could produce very historic outcomes. Oftentimes people that might have been morally ambiguous or not necessarily the most saintly figures would do tremendous things, because everybody is not great at everything. Some people might be saintly figures, but they're not necessarily great kings. Some people are kings and they have just enough knowledge and integrity to be just, but that's not their forte. And the culmination of those things is what creates that king or that particular historic person. So we've really tried to focus on the humanizing element of history. But most importantly, the strand you'll find throughout all of our podcasts and series is this idea that we want to learn from history. We don't want to simply digest history for the purposes of understanding what happened in a linear fashion. The core objective is to be able to learn from the mistakes of history and also learn from things that work well in history, because history, for those who study it, will know that it's very cyclical and the same patterns and themes will recur over and over again.
Yeah, and
there's always something we can learn.
That's a major point, because I think, and I think we talked about this on the pilot as well, but history is so important for every single human being that actually wants to improve their life. Like, if you actually want better for yourself in any capacity, worldly life, in the hereafter, if you will, you need to know your past, because you will find stories that you will relate to, that you'll say, hey, you know what? I was in a similar position in here. How do I do it? And the problem with society now is we've stripped away history. Everyone's only important moment is the moment they're living in right now, and they don't know that there are options in their decisions. They feel that, okay, I have to go and do this. There's no other option. But if you knew a little bit of history, you knew a little bit about your ancestors, if you listen to your grandma and grandma as an example, they might have told you a story, and it would have been like, oh, this happened to my grandma or this happened to my great. And now you can navigate that problem completely differently. But because we are, and I think this is part of the, this is a rabbit hole conversation at this point. But due to design, we are plagued to make wrong decisions. And I think taking this step to show you that life was full of ups and downs, that people were ambitious, that people wanted wealth, that people desired things. That's important because now they're humans. Now they're more relatable to you. Now that idea that you can't ever be a person like that. No, you have every inkling to be exactly like that person.
Yep. And that's why our tagline is retaking history, because we're trying to reify history instead of reading it as a hagiography, which is essentially just sanctifying somebody and making them look like they were something not from this world and not prone to error like we know all humans are.
Absolutely. No. So today, Madrid, where are we going today? What's our journey? Last time we ended with the end of the Abbas. Actually, we didn't but we got through the Abbasid Khalifa a little bit. Right. We talked about it.
Yeah.
So we didn't finish it.
It was lessons from the Abbasid revolution, but really it was a dissection of the Umayyads from A to Z. We started in 661, ended off more or less in 750. Talked about some of the trends that led to the Umayyads, what I would call premature downfall, because they did so many things so incredibly successfully well early on that you would have thought as a uninterested viewer, observer of history that they would have lasted longer. But they only lasted 89 to 90 years because there were some fatal mistakes that they made along the way. And we talked about that in the last podcast.
Yeah, and I'm still taken by that because, look, I said this last episode, and I'm going to say it again because I think people need to pay attention to this. When Islam was founded, it had so much optimism, right? Like the people were so into it. And then you had amazing individuals like Abu Bakr, Uthman, and Omar radiallahu anh. They were all ready, and they led such a shimmering example that till now, people are still inspired by these figures. So you would imagine the next guy in line has to be cut of not just the same cloth, but of imaginary gold and silks that don't even exist on earth. But for it to just completely...
Well, and to be clear, the next guy, Imam Ali, was cut.
Oh, Imam Ali, yeah.
But after that, there's a steep drop.
There's a steep drop. Yeah, I didn't include Imam Ali on purpose because he was part of the drama that ensued, right? But it's just so shocking that so quickly... But that's the point of the whole point here, that history is full of human beings. And these are not all saintly characters, as you said so well.
Yeah. And this is a conversation that me and Thodic had earlier is when you look at all historic figures presumptively through a lens of hagiography, you assume everybody is a companion of the Prophet, a Sahaba Ikram. You actually dilute the equity, or so to speak, of the actual Sahaba Ikram. This is my way of saying not everybody is Imam Ali, Sayyidina Uthman, Umar, Abu Bakr. There's very few of them
amongst them.
That's what makes them so special. Yeah, there's definitely a few good Tariqs in the
squad.
Yeah.
No. So taking off from that, and I don't want to go on too many tangents, although I'm sure I'll drag you through some tangents out here. What are we talking about today? Where are we going?
I think a good topic for today would be to look at the Ottoman Empire, and namely a question that I've heard a lot of people floating around, and maybe it's more relevant in this day and age of people seeing that there's a lot of things happening to Muslims around the world, and there's really not a defender. There's really not a central authority, a big brother, if you will, that can step in and save the day. Not that there ever was that person, but a lot of people are expecting the Khalif or the Khilafah to play that role. So it's really natural that when you've got all these different conversations and questions floating around, people start to look back at history and see who are some of the functionaries that really played that role in the past. And the most obvious and recent one is the Ottoman Empire, when they were the Khalifs up until technically 1924, but functionally they probably ended even before that, around 1917, 1918, 1919, depending on how you slice it. The Ottomans, what I would say to answer that question, were they good or bad? That's obviously a very loaded question, and the answer is really in the eye of the beholder, just like beauty. Interesting. So there's going to be some people, just like the most effective politician today or the most effective world leader, that has a lot of hate for the Ottomans. There's going to be people that love the Ottomans. But if you look at it and you dissect it, objectively speaking, there's a lot of good there to unpack. What I will say about the Ottomans is they are a victim of their own success.
Okay.
So when we ask about whether they were good or bad, it's just like what happens to any government when they've been in office for 20 years. Nobody likes them anymore because they have so much, they're kind of sick of them. Not only that, you've got a huge sample size of mistakes that your enemies or your opponents can bring up and lord over your head, and it'll just become louder and louder. So the Ottomans, being the longest lasting dynasty in history at 625 years.
So nothing's lasted longer than that.
No dynasty has lasted that long.
Oh, wow.
Actually, really incredible.
So that should even be a point for them, that they were able to hold it together for so long, you would imagine.
And it's purely a function of the founders of the Ottoman dynasty. And the way I would look at it is, we were talking about great other dynasties, for example, dynasties in basketball or American football, right?
Sure.
So if you go to me, hey, were the Chicago Bulls any good? Are you really asking about the 1976 Bulls? Or are you saying the 91 to the 98 Bulls?
Yeah, the Jordan Bulls. That's
If you're asking me about, hey, were the Patriots any good? You don't want to have me tell you about 1994.
No, I don't even want to know about 2025.
Exactly. So the 1991 to the 98 Ottomans, or so to speak, or the 2001 to the 2018 Ottomans, the equivalent was actually the early founders of the Ottoman Empire from 1299 until about 1566. But let's push that further out to even 1600. But at least until 1566, you've got 267 years of what I'll call peak dynastic outcome. Certainly in Islamic history, you've never had any dynasty that in succession had at least a competent to effective ruler all the way to an exceptional historic ruler in succession without a single nut job or mad king. The Ottomans literally had that from 1299 until 1566.
Back to back.
Exactly. And because those founders did such a tremendous job for those 267 years, it actually coasted for the next 350 or 400 years. They established so many institutions that it coasted, I would say, from the second half of maybe the 18th century, and certainly by the 19th century, it was the sick man of Europe, and it was just waxing and waning.
It went from coasting to
collapsing, but they weren't innovating, and they weren't getting great rulers anymore.
Oh, I see.
And the irony in that is part of some of their historic practices that they had in the early era. I'll call it the golden era of the Ottomans up until 1566. They had some questionable practices that were outlawed later. For example, fratricide, that actually did them in, ironically, over the long term. And it kind of goes back to some of the other discussions that we've had, where you see in history that sometimes the most congenial or the nice thing to do isn't always the thing with the best outcomes. And
somehow it's never the case.
It's never the case. That doesn't excuse you doing the utilitarian thing, but it is absolutely a trend you will see in history. And I don't know that in a lot of cases, like in the Ottomans, that you would want to change anything. But you just have to appreciate the trend that there's a lot of things like Ottoman fratricide was actually very effective for them. And we'll get into that in a second.
So doing that was a good thing.
I don't want to say good because obviously you're dealing with the loss of life.
Sure.
But it actually worked out for them because their system was flawed in other ways that required that to be
I see.
A bit of a saving grace.
But it helped them maintain their rule by doing it.
It helped them spawned quality rulers one after the other, where they had at least 10 rulers that were, again, if you're an Ottoman fan, you would say they're pretty much all exceptional rulers, or you can say as a baseline competent to maybe some of the greatest, I would say one or two of the greatest Muslim rulers in modern history.
Oh, wow.
Right. So
Big titles being given here.
big titles being handed out like flyers.
These are MVP rings going out here.
MVP, Hall of Fame, you name it.
Wow.
So where do we start? You want to maybe pop in some questions? Because I can go through that early period. I'm going to go through that.
Well, I think one question that I've always had is that, so, you know, a lot of things happened from the Abbasid Khalifa to the Ottoman Empire, right? And the Mongols and war and this and that. But I think really quickly, I think people are very curious. How did it go from Arab-speaking people to Turkish-speaking people? I think that's and I don't know. There's a lot.
That's a whole different episode unto itself.
I know it's a whole different episode, but I feel people are going to be super curious. Okay, like, you know, they have the show Ertugrul. There's a lot of shows that narrow this down. But I think if you can really quick, because like what even made, because at the same time, the Abbasids were still there, right? They were still there. So how about we talk about...
But there is no overlap. Okay, so basically what happens is after Salahuddin al-Ayyubi in 1187, when he liberates Quds from a Muslim perspective and
now it's during the Abbasid time.
Technically the Abbasids were still around.
Right.
But Salahuddin, in his infinite humility, would call himself Salahuddin Nasr al-Amir al-Mu'minin.
Right.
Saladin, the helper, the assistant of the Khalif. Because he always wanted to deflect and just say, look, the Abbasi Khalif is the Khalif. I'm just Saladin here, the warrior, trying to enact justice and things like that. He was always very deflective. He never called himself the Khalif, he called himself the Sultan. Even though, without question, he was the strongest, most powerful king in the Muslim world at the time, for the late 12th century. Almost immediately after Salahuddin dies, you start to see a change in Asia Minor, in the Eastern Turkic people. Salahuddin dies in 1193, and by 1220, 1227, Genghis Khan rises in the east, and just the Mongols come out of nowhere. He has a very effective, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but he has a very revolutionary way of raising army corps. He has a certain organization method that is very effective in raising large numbers of people really quickly and training them. And they're just all very fierce people that really, they kind of remind me of Khalid ibn Walid. So Khalid ibn Walid was one of the greatest generals in modern Islamic history. And the crazy thing about him is, although he was a Sahabi, he's not really known for his piety, although he was a very religious guy, obviously, but he's not known for how many hadith, traditions of the Prophet he narrated. He wasn't known for his knowledge or how he recited the Quran, or Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas. All these other Sahabis are often known for something liturgical or religious. He was just known for being a tremendous general and warrior. All he wanted to do is study warfare and the history of warfare and just go and kick somebody's butt. That's what he was built to do. I would compare him in many ways to maybe even you could say like a Kobe or a Michael Jordan. All they care about is like, I want to win.
Yeah.
And I think he was probably a bit more balanced maybe than MJ was. You know, let's call him Kobe.
Sure.
But he was designed to do one thing, and he was just obsessed with that one thing.
Yeah.
And that was winning on the battlefield. And that's why he's pioneered so many things that are tactics and military savvy that people are still teaching to this day. But I don't want this to be about KBW as I call it. But in many ways, Genghis Khan is like that. And all his warriors are cut from that cloth. They're all just a pack of warriors that are really good at what they do. They're really good at intimidating. They're not afraid of anything. And they just take the world by storm. So 1227, they start coming into Eastern Muslim lands. And this is the problem with the Muslims. The Shah of the Khwarizm Empire is very aggressive and arrogant. And he kind of ticks him off. And he even kills his emissary, which is wrong. So he's ratcheting up the hornet's nest, and in this case, the hornet is like a huge Asian hornet, yellow jacket, not even the hornets, the killer bees.
Yeah.
They come in and they decimate the Khwarazm Empire. They come west into Khorasan, and they're just wiping us out left, right, and center. And there is no defense to these guys. Come 1258, the Abbasis are still in Baghdad. They have a lot of respect and soft power and influence. There's still a lot of prestige with the Khalif Mu'tasim. And in many ways, it's like a philanthropic role where they're funding other people, and other people are deriving their legitimacy to rule through them. Even like Salahuddin, hey, I'm the Nasr al-Khalif and things like that. But they actually don't have any true power themselves. So you can't look at the Abbasid downfall as a fall from grace the way you could the Achaemenid Empire to Alexander, which just came out of nowhere, or even the Umayyad Empire when they were decimated by the Abbasis. That almost, for an outside observer, came out of nowhere. It was just a sudden, steep fall from grace. It's like sudden death in football. Like you just lose, right? Your season's over. It was like that. That was the Mongols. They came in 1258. There are some reports that the vizier and the people advising Khalif al-Mu'tasim are downplaying the threat. Oh, don't worry about it. So the Khalif actually ends up disbanding his very formidable army. Although he's reportedly called weak, he still has an army north of 120,000 people. He can easily defend. The vizier, people question his motivations in history. I don't want to get into that because that's another hornet's nest. Whatever his motivations were, he clearly dropped the ball, and the Khalif's army is disbanded down to mere thousands. So there's really nobody to protect Baghdad when the Mongols inevitably make it to Iraq. And the Mongols' methodology is you surrender and maybe we let you go, but if you don't surrender, you are not living to tell the story. And I've seen varying stats in terms of the impact that the Mongols had on world population. It's somewhere between 5 and 25, 30% of the world's population was just wiped out by the Mongols.
Wow.
Nobody could stop them.
Wow.
And that's why I do want to take some time to focus an episode on Ain Jalut, which was just a clutch win in basically Bilad al-Sham in Palestine, where the Muslim army made a last stand and finally halted the Mongols in 1260 after they had decimated Baghdad. They came in, going back to Baghdad, they killed every last person in Baghdad, or a big chunk of them. They burned the city. They took all the books, which represented a substantial portion of the world's books. Let's call it like 60, 70, 80%. They just threw it into the river, and they say the river bled blue from the ink of the books for about 6 days. The collective loss of knowledge on that day that the Mongols heaped upon us was catastrophic, and intellectually, I don't know that we ever recovered. The Ottomans did tremendous things after that in other fields and verticals, but in terms of being the smartest people on the block, nope.
That was gone.
Yeah. The Enlightenment came from Europe for a reason. We fell behind in other ways, and the Ottomans are to blame for some of that. So let's start with some of the negatives when it comes to the Ottomans.
Sure.
So 1258, the Arabiana is smashed in Baghdad, and you start seeing a revival from the Turkic people and the Asia Minor people, and you've had the Mamluks and the Seljuks scattered around the world, serving under the Abbasis and having their own little empires here and there, and including Ain Jalut was actually led by some Turkic responders, if I'm not mistaken. Qutuz and Baybars, they're Arabic, but they have a lot of Turkic support. They're Mamluks, and the Mamluks originally came from Asia Minor and Turkmenistan.
Never from Egypt.
Area.
Mamluks are not in Egypt.
So I think they rule from Egypt, but I believe genealogically,
Oh, I see.
this is something we'll explore in its own episode.
There's always
Right, there's always something that we can do,
Yeah.
but there's definitely a strong undercurrent of Turkic people when it comes to the Mamluks, right? So a lot of support, a lot of their army cadre and things like that. So for the next 42 years, the world is very different, to the point where ulama like Ibn Taymiyyah, who initially would write that it's unconscionable that a Muslim would go live in non-Muslim lands, is now starting to write about, well, how do Muslims respond when they're living in non-Muslim lands? Because there's no Muslim lands really left. We've just been decimated.
Oh, wow.
It's really that bad. It's catastrophic. And if you're a political scientist in 1275, 1280, you're thinking these guys are has-been. Their day is behind them. The day of the Mongols is here. The Muslims are done. It was cute while it lasted, but these guys are now relegated to posterity. And then slowly but surely, those Mongols, people from Asia Minor, who are interfused and mixed sort of with the Turkey people, started to become Muslim. And one of the groups of Turkic people that really started to get more organized and powerful and have is a sort of, I guess you would call it an insurgence or just strong growth, is the people in Anatolia, namely the Kai tribe of Ertugrul Bey and his descendant or son, Osman Ghazi. So Osman Ghazi is, and this is something that floored me when I went to visit his tomb in Bursa.
Oh, so you went? You
Of course I went.
Oh, wow.
Of course I went.
Historical.
I go to visit his tomb, and I actually wasn't aware of this, but it just stunned me in my tracks, because everybody knows that the Abbasis, we got destroyed, the Muslim world got destroyed in 1258, right? But when I went to his tomb and I look at the epitaph and it talks about his years of life, and he was born in 1258.
Oh, wow.
So the symbolism there, I was stunned. And I even told the tour guide, who I seemed to be lecturing a lot over that trip. I told him, I go, dude, you know what happened in 1258? And of course, he has no idea. I'm like, this is the day that the Abbasids, he's like, oh, you mean the guys in Iraq? I'm like, yes, the guys in Iraq, the Abbasis, they got destroyed in 1258. And this man, the next reviver of the great Islamic Empire, is born in that same year. That's just so crazy. It was so crazily symbolic, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Wow. This brings us to a very unique opportunity here, is that before we jump so deep into the Ottoman Empire and get all wrapped up in it, I know friends that tell me the worst thing that happened in Islamic history is the Ottoman Empire. Full stop. Like, that was the worst thing that ever happened. And in that same conversation, I'll be sitting with somebody else, and they'll tell me nothing better since the rightly guided Khalifas, since the four of them, there was nothing good until the Ottomans showed up. So for me, this is a very difficult balancing act. It's like, well, how can someone be hated so much by some, and then at the same time loved so much by some? And they will have these wild examples, things like infanticide, things like building and conquering the Muslim lands, defeating the Mongols. There's just so many things that people credit to them one way or another. But now that you're here and you're telling us this wonderful story about history, how about you break it down to us? Give us some of the good things the Ottoman did. Give us some of the bad things the Ottoman did. Let's lay it down right here. Let's put it down.
Yep. So in defense of the Ottomans, I'll say what I said earlier, is they are a victim of their own success. The same people that have legitimate claims and grievances against the Ottoman Empire only have those because they lasted so damn long that they kind of defecated the bed, or so to speak. I'm going to try and keep things short.
Really,
but it's like I'm going to go back to Batman again. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain. That's what happened to the Ottoman Empire. People, for example, the Armenian genocide. Armenians are steadfast that there was a genocide, and a lot of my Turkish brothers, they're not going to be happy with me. I'm sorry to say this, but sometimes it gets very hard to defend based on the numbers and the facts. I know Erdogan has his position on why it didn't happen. Armenians certainly have their position for why it happened. But the fact is, it wasn't all roses and musk when it came to the Turco-Armenian relations of the 20th century. But that in and of itself is my point, is it was the 20th century. By then, the Ottoman Empire has been around for 600 years. They're a shadow of their former self when I talk about the heyday of 1299 to 1566. They're being run by secular nationalists who aren't even actually from the Ottoman dynasty. And so the Ottoman dynasty, fair or not, has to wear the actions of Jamal Pasha Safa, who was very repressive in the Middle East. Syrians probably hate the Ottoman Empire because all they remember is Jamal Pasha, and the Lebanese because all they remember is them executing people around the First World War, because there was dissension, there was rebellion, and there was a war happening with the Europeans. And Jamal Pasha, he wasn't even a very heroic figure. He wasn't particularly a man known to be of integrity, or he wasn't a religious person where you can say, look, at least he was a God-fearing man. He was secular, almost atheist, agnostic. In some ways, you're thinking, why does the Ottoman Empire really have, or the Ottoman sultans and the khalifs, why do they have to wear the actions of that guy?
Yeah.
Now, some people are going to come back and say, oh, no, but in 1870s and 80s, there was some skirmishes between the sultan's forces and the Armenians. Again, I will chalk it up to year in year 575 at that point, or 600.
You're still way in.
Most of the grievances, and I fully recognize that one man's king and one man's conqueror and one man's hero is another man's enemy. So I'm not here to say that all the greatest of Ottoman kings were going to have a popularity rating of 99.9% in the world. Of course, there's going to be people that are not happy with them because they're defeating them. But in terms of them being balanced, positive, and carrying a consensus or currying favor and respect among even their enemies, the golden era and the last 300 years, the last 150 years, are night and day difference.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of what plagues the Ottoman memory is those last years when they were the sick man of Europe. In some ways, they were insecure in their position, so they had to be repressive, right? It's kind of like the overprotective, abusive boyfriend. He's got to be that way because he's insecure. That's kind of what starts happening. You get repressive. You start not being confident in your position. You resort to half measures that are essentially Pyrrhic measures that are going to ruin self-defeating long term. That's basically what happens. That's what is behind a lot of the things that people don't like about the Ottomans.
So it's that last little bit of history that they're complaining about.
Yeah, exactly. Before that, they definitely were very fearsome, and a lot of Europeans were definitely intimidated by them, but there was a healthy respect. One of my favorite anecdotes is Mehmet the Great, Mehmet II, as I call him, the Great, Al-Fatih in Arabic. He's considered in European lore and by most of his contemporaries to be the eagle of Europe. So in the same fell swoop, they're both respecting him by giving him the symbolism of an eagle. He's a visionary. The Romans also used imagery of eagles to embody their reign and their rule. It's really a majestic creature that has a lot of great attributes, but they're also calling it the rapacious eagle. So that Mehmet, he's an eagle, but you know those eagles. But it was
Interesting.
implicitly respecting him, fearing him, and hating him at the same time. And I think you can learn a lot from what your enemies say about you. And that's what I take from Mehmet. He was the man that struck fear into basically everybody. So people that were on the other side of that were not going to say glowing things about him, but they respected him. I don't know that you have that same glowing imagery or phraseology related to the Ottomans in the 18, 19, 20th century. That kind of goes
faded away. Yeah. Faded away.
They start to be called the sick man of Europe and things like that. So you hit it on the head earlier. What do they do poorly? Near the end, they got very repressive, and they did things that were uncharacteristic of the founders, right? The most common criticism, it is repressiveness near the end. They did things like they banned the printing press. So over time, scholarly innovation and accretion stopped happening in the community. And the Enlightenment, by design and as a direct response to those types of measures, happened in Europe, where they did have the mass production of books and material, kind of like what we used to have in the Abbasid era. So,
now, is there truth to the idea that they had nepotism towards Turks versus Arabs in the end? Like was that like for the army?
So yes and no. In fact, I would say every dynasty, every king is going to favor his own people. Every ruling class is, of course, going to favor people that look or talk like them and come from the same culture. You see it in Canada, right? You'll see it in America. You'll see it in England. The Ottomans are not going to be cut any differently in terms of humans from any different cloth. They're going to have them. But when I compare them to the earlier, the medieval era, because nowadays what we love to do is apply our 2025 lens of sensibility to people that lived 500 years ago and didn't even know what they were doing was wrong. It's a really bizarre standard to impose on somebody.
Brilliant.
Right? Yeah. But if you compare them to their contemporaries, the medieval kingdoms and monarchies, they were way more, for lack of a better term, tolerant. In fact, one of their defining characteristics is that they were very protective of minorities. So, for example, when Jews were being persecuted in Spain in 1492 and killed and executed, the Ottoman sultan of the time, Bayezid II, sent emissaries collecting Sephardic Jews to bring them to the Ottoman Empire. And they served in high office, and they definitely had a very prominent position within the Ottoman Empire. They had legislated, following the Sharia, a set of rules pertaining to dhimmis that protected minorities. They categorically had laws to protect minorities in their midst. And in fact, a lot of scholars say one of the turning points for the worst in the 19th century was where the Ottoman Empire became so weak that there was pogroms happening to Jews in the fringes of their empire. For example, the blood libel of Rhodes, and the Sultan was not strong enough to intervene anymore. So that was the turning point, because now you're not even a safe haven for minorities, where these minorities can come, join the fabric of society, and create this flourishing melange of different ideas. That was really their strength in so many ways, that they had people from Eastern Europe come and serve in high office. The Janissaries were almost entirely conscripted from the Balkans and from the European world. So they were very diverse. Even their own gene pool, every single Ottoman sultan would marry some Slavic woman, so their kids would be half Slavic. Oh. So they're just very diverse. And
that was all in Ely, or
this
like, well, you know,
it was fairly intentional. Yeah, I think they wanted to broaden the horizons, and maybe they had some sort of a predilection for Eastern European women. There's probably a combination of a bunch of different things. But the bottom line is they were a lot more pluralistic than any Muslim empire before them, and any medieval empire that was around at the time.
Yeah, sure.
So they were very protective of minorities. They, from an Islamic standpoint, were actually uniters of the entire ummah. So they brought everyone together under one banner. They fought against the Crusaders, no matter where they were. They really saw themselves as the big brothers. And whether actually pious or not, way more so than the Abbasids and the Umayyads, they seem to understand the importance of projecting piety. They definitely understood, and they respected the need to be seen as religious and to promote religious values. They didn't have any tensions with the ulama and the scholars the way the Abbasids would imprison them and try and get them to come along.
Oh, that didn't in their time.
The Umayyads worked closely with the ulama. Of course, the king's always going to have some influence, but Noah Feldman actually writes about this. This is a very good trend that started with the Mihna, which I want to focus on in his own episode. But after the Mihna, what ended up happening was the scholars were increasingly looked to as a category of people outside the state that would arbite whether or not Islamic law was being followed. So the people would say, look to the imam or the ulama to see whether the khalif is following the law. If the ulama said no, that might open the door to some sort of a coup d'etat or replacement, because that person loses his legitimacy to rule. It starts with the idea that the general populace is very devout, and what matters to them is this man ruling by Islamic law? Oh. And who's the arbiter? The alim. So Noah Feldman writes about this and says that actually was a big source of check and balance within the later Abbasid period, where it became very decentralized and it started to hum and operate on its own, in spite of not having that many great rulers after the initial 100 years.
But the people just felt these were good guys. Like we can go behind these guys.
Because the ulama are judging their actions according to to theology. And so he's got to keep honest as the ruler. So by the time the Ottomans come around, it's well enshrined in Islamic culture and theology that what are the ulama saying about what this Khalif is doing? If you're going to have the title of Khalif, it's not the Umayyad period anymore where you're going to go kill somebody in Mecca. And you're going to live to tell the story. So the Ottomans are held to a high standard. They showed a lot of respect to the Prophet, Ahl al-Bayt, peace be upon him, Ahl al-Bayt. And I always think of the example of if you go to Topkapi Palace, they have so many classic relics and artifacts from the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Yeah.
And in the halls where they store those relics, literally since Salim the Resolute conquering the Hijaz in 1517, they've had live qadis, reciters of the Quran, in those halls reciting the Quran to serenade the artifacts that belong to the Prophet and his family, peace be upon him, out of respect. Every Friday morning, the Sultan would come out himself, wouldn't entrust this to anybody else, and wash on a special stone the artifacts himself in the robe of the Prophet. That's the level of respect that they have.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Contrast that to some of the conversations we had about the Umayyads, for example, right?
Huge difference.
Huge difference, right?
Wow.
And so the
Sultan used to do that. That was part of their ritual.
if you go to Topkapi, you'll see where he did that.
Oh.
It's actually incredible. And they still have a live qadi to this day reciting Quran in those same halls because of that respect that they have.
Oh, wow.
So it's just a different brand entirely than the Umayyads. And the Abbasids kind of realized they had to do that. But the Ottomans, it's a whole nother level. Now, people will come back and say, well, how come the Ottomans generally didn't go for Hajj? I'm not saying anybody here is a Sahaba Ikram. Nobody's a companion of the Prophet. But they were definitely more outwardly or ostensibly religious than the earlier Khalifs. And they didn't have a culture where the Umayyads and the Abbasids would be known to drink openly. And they did have some. There certainly were some, but it was definitely frowned upon a lot more. And they were just a lot more devout in that way. So you had that. They saw themselves as the protector of the Haramain. This concept of Khadim al-Haramaini Sharifain that actually came from the Ottomans. They were the helpers of the two Harams. They kind of originated that concept. They were very good to minorities, relatively speaking, for their time. Those are all things that they did tremendously well. But it started with those founders. That's what I would say. So people that hate them, I can understand why they hate him because they lived long enough to become the villain. And they did things that weren't really Ottomanian anymore, but they still have to own it. So I'm not here to give an apologia for Jamal Pasha and people in the 19th century. But when I remember the Ottoman Empire and when I talk about how it was one of the greatest eras in Islamic history, I'm talking about 1299 to 1566. You could match that up side by side to any other dynastic run in history. And I've never been able to come across a successive run of 10 kings that were at least competent, no catastrophic outcomes, were anywhere between competent to exceptional and historic.
Wow.
There's never been a run like that.
So going into that, talking about this incredible run, I think it would make sense that we talk about some of these people that were running. You know what I mean? We can't just talk about this amazing race and not know some of the players or the athletes in this thing. So if you were to put together, and I'm putting this on the spot for you, maybe top three, if you will, top three Ottoman rulers that were just exceptional, in your opinion.
Yeah.
And then, obviously don't just tell us the names. You have to give us a reason. You know what I mean?
Yep. So most of the glory to Eurocentric scholars, people that are looking at this from a secular perspective, goes towards Suleiman the Magnificent. Because he did represent the aegis and the high water mark of Ottoman civilization when you factor in territorial expansion, you factor in quality of life, prosperity within the Ummah. They were just at perfectly cruising altitude when he ruled from 1520 to 1566. He was also the Sultan that rebuilt Quds in Jerusalem. He actually built it a level above Aelia Capitolina and what the Romans had built, that the Muslims, even up until Salahuddin, were living an entire level down. So he built it a level up, and he renovated the entire area. He made some. He did some really exceptional things. He was a great warrior, and he's just remembered as the Magnificent in English and Al-Qanuni in Arabic.
Yeah.
But to me, the greatest Ottoman ever is also maybe one of the top 2-3 greatest Islamic rulers of all time, is without a doubt Muhammad al-Fatih, Mehmed the Great, Mehmed the Conqueror. And before I even get into his story, I'm going to share a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said.
Okay.
So he goes, لَتُفْتَحَنَّ قِسْطَنْطِنِيَّةً فَلَنِعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ أَمِيرِهَا وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. So what he's saying is, Constantinople will be liberated, and what a beautiful, blessed leader that their leader will be, and what a blessed army that will be. So this hadith is issued 629, 630, let's say.
Way before anybody knows anything.
In 1453 is when Constantinople finally comes. So many people have tried to live up to that prophecy, because who doesn't want to be that person? Of course. But only one person actually accomplishes that, right? Wow. And maybe it makes sense to kind of contextualize what he did. We can take it from the top, right? He's definitely my favorite, and so I'm going to give away the flow of how we get to him and what he represents. But I think it's important to understand that entire dynastic run. So it starts with Osman Ghazi, 1299, is when they have achieved a sufficient milestone of territories to call themselves a polity on the international scale.
Does the Abbasid Khalifa still exist at this time?
1258, they've been wiped out.
1258, they're gone.
Remember, Osman Ghazi is born that same year. 1299 is when he throws down the...
And in between there, it's just the Mongols destroying and pillaging, more or less.
But then they start to convert to Islam as well. Late 12...
But they don't actually run as Muslims. Like, they don't actually rule.
They do over time, and we'll get into this. This is late. This is
So they do for a little bit. So they do for a little bit. So...
Yeah, so a lot of these people, like the Turkic people, the Mughal emperor of India, the emperors, they're actually descended from the Mongols. Mm-hmm. So you do have people in Asia Minor that are starting to rule, and their descendants, like Berke Khan. There are Mongolians that are converting.
But are they ruling as a Khalifa, or are they just ruling as...
No, not as a Khalifa, but they're converting, and they're starting to become religious.
Gotcha. Okay.
So by 1299, though, the Ottomans have really...
That's a question I'm asking. And is there a Khalifa that exists on the earth at this moment?
1258 to 1299. That's a great question. I believe it would be if anybody, it's probably the Mamluks. They're not, but when I say Khalif,
yes,
it's really a question of whether the people consider you a Khalif.
Sure.
So the Abbasis, by some people's records, considered themselves Khalif even as pretenders afterwards.
Oh, I see.
But the question really is does anyone raise a sufficient mass of people in the world considering you to be the Khalif? Mm-hmm. That's why it's kind of like an obscure, an abstract question. It's not really a question of, do you have...
It's not very obvious right now. Just because you say you are doesn't mean you actually are.
So the Ottomans, when they conquer Al-Hijaz in 1517 under Salim the Resolute, or Salim the Grim as he's called in English, that's when they take over Mecca and Medina, and they get the relics of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So that's when they start considering themselves Khalifs.
Oh, I see.
And the world says, yeah, you're the Khalif because you have the Hijaz, and you're protecting the entire Ummah, including the holy sites. You have Quds, right? It all just kind of falls into place. So now they control all 3 holy sites.
Sure.
That's where that comes from.
Got it.
So 1258 to 1299 is like a dead man's land, is a dead ball era for the Muslim Ummah. The Ottomans start to revive that. Osman Ghazi lives until 1324. He has an iconic moment before he dies where he's on the border with Christendom in Bursa, and he points to his son, Orhan Ghazi, and he looks over at a green dome, and he goes, son, I want you to conquer Bursa and bury me under that dome. So over time, Orhan Ghazi does actually accomplish that. He takes over Bursa. It's a huge watershed moment for the Ottomans.
Really, his son does it.
His son
actually does it.
Orhan Ghazi does it. 1324 to 62, I believe, is his rule. And those first 2 sultans are the ones that still call themselves Ghazis. They don't see themselves as uppity emperors. They're just scrappy little Ghazis. And they love it. They're very aggressive. They love the tribalistic vibes that their family still has. They're more of a polity than they are an empire. But that moment of taking over Bursa is a huge watershed moment. It becomes their capital. And then his son, Orhan Ghazi's son, is Murad. So Murad the First rules from 1362 until 1389. So you notice these are long-lasting people.
Yeah, I'm noticing.
3 emperors over 3 years. So they're living long, they're healthy, they're actually starting young, and they're training their kids to be rulers. So Murad is actually very effective. He starts professionalizing the empire, as I want to call it. They truly start to become an empire. The Ottoman Sultan is seen as a force to be reckoned with. He has his whole tent and procession when he goes somewhere. There's a lot of pomp and glory now to the way he operates. In 1389, he dies at the Battle of Kosovo. So a lot of the Eastern Europeans, the Kosovars and the Serbians, they hailed that day as a victory where they stood up to the Ottomans, and they even took out the great Ottomans.
They still celebrate till today.
The Battle of Kosovo, 1389. What happened was they actually, for all intents and purposes, the Ottomans won that day. But Murad, near the end, when the battle was won, he was told that there was a defector from the other side that had become Muslim, according to Ottoman reports. He went to give him a hug, and the guy stabbed him and killed him.
Oh,
so from that point on, you were not getting close to the Ottoman Sultan because they were so terrified by what had happened to Murad. But another funny thing happens is the legacy of fratricide begins on that day. At the Battle of Kosovo, Bayezid the First, he's known as Yildirim, the Thunderbolt in Turkish, because everything he does is super fast, and it starts on this day. He's brilliant general, very effective, very enigmatic guy, because he spends his nights praying tahajjud at the masjid and praying, and then he spends his weekends partying it up and like drinking alcohol, and he's just a man of extremes, right? He's also very arrogant. He's a very interesting character, Bayezid the First.
Yeah.
At the Battle of Kosovo, the moment he finds out that his dad's been killed, he immediately summons the power brokers at B into his tent, and then he has his special forces execute his brother so that there's no rival to the throne. Like, this man is savage, okay?
Oh, wow.
This is the most enigmatic guy.
This is out of nowhere. This is what he decides to do.
Yeah, there's no precedent for this. Every sultan before was just dying of natural causes. Like, this man starts it off, right?
Wow.
So he becomes the Ottoman Sultan, and he actually does a great job fighting Eastern Europeans, fighting off Crusaders. At the Battle of Nicopolis, I believe, he defeats the Crusaders, but he's also very brutal. He starts executing a bunch of them, and while he's executing so many of them, even his generals start to intervene. They go, listen, stop killing so many people because you're just unnecessarily alienating all of Europe. You've got your victory, just call it off. So he's stockpiling victories, and he just moves very quickly. But he's also very arrogant. So he has this enemy rising from the east, a Mongolian descendant by the name of Timur. Tamer Lame in English, Timur Lang in Urdu. So Timur is probably the only guy that's more arrogant and more repressive and more aggressive than he is. And Timur is one of those guys that he makes a pact with some people where he goes, let me in, and I won't spill any blood. The people let him into the city, and then he buries them alive. He's like, I'm not spilling any blood.
Oh, wow.
Like, he's that level of savage. A lot like what the Abbasids were, right? Just
unbelievable.
Hey, come, we're all friends. And there was moments where Timur, he's outside the fold of Islam. He put people in churches, house of worships, masjids, and would just burn them alive, bolt the doors. He was a very savage guy.
Oh, wow.
Now, Bayezid has never lost in his life. So he's also been vindicated by his success, and he's very arrogant. So they have this warfare of letters where they're going back and forth, calling each other names. It's really juvenile. Two of the greatest generals and kings of their time.
And they have these letters documented.
They're sending them back and forth, like, you are my little Biab, this,
really?
That. Like, it's just like really petty stuff, right?
Okay.
And then he starts embarrassing Timur's emissaries. So Timur's like, okay, we're going to have a word about this. And then he marches west. And then he meets Bayezid in 1402 at Ankara, which is now a major, major city in Turkey. And Bayezid, to his credit, fights very with a lot of nobility and a lot of valor. And in fact, his brother-in-law, I believe his name is Stefano, Serbian or Croatian, he's like, Bayezid, you need to leave. The battle is lost. Because what happens is it's kind of blow for blow early in the battle, but Timur's got elephants. And when you have elephants and you're coming up against an army, and the Sahaba, the early Muslim army faces too. When we went to Persia and the Persians rolled out the elephants, it was not a good day to run. It was not a good day for our guys.
Right.
Same thing happened. Bayezid was decimated. His brother-in-law is telling him, run for your life. This battle is lost. And to his credit, although I'm not a big fan of Bayezid for a lot of the things that he did, he goes, no, I'm going to stand here, I'm going to fight, and I'm going to let my family, I'm going to buy some time for my kids to get away.
Oh.
Like, to his credit, he actually stood there, and then he was captured before he thought he was going to fight to the death, but they actually captured him. And that's the worst possible outcome for the poor guy. Well, not the poor guy, but for the guy.
And he got tortured.
Him and his wife, Oliveira Despina, I think her name is, they're now imprisoned by Timur, the guy that they were just trash talking. He dies in about 6 to 9 months of depression.
Oh, wow.
A lot of reports say that he was ill-treated, that his wife was just embarrassed and ridiculed. Like, it was really bad because really, if you think about it, knowing what you know about Timur, why would he do not be unsensible? Like, he doesn't have a sensible, like, nothing I know about the guy is sensible, right? So I'm sure it sucked to be Bayezid for 1402, 1402.
Sure.
The real disaster, though, is the Ottomans no longer have a sultan, and a bunch of his sons, I believe Mustafa Çelebi, they have Suleiman, Isa, some of them were captured, but they're let out as dupes by Timur. But some of them, like Mehmet I, escapes the battle. His dad was like, just get out of here. Get out of here and go save the day later on. Bayezid doesn't live long enough for any of his boys to save him. He just dies in captivity within 6 to 9 months. But Mustafa Çelebi, Suleiman, Isa Çelebi, Mehmet, Isa, all these guys wage a devastating 10, 11-year civil war. It's called the interregnum period, but it really isn't all fitna for the Ottomans, excuse me.
So everyone's going against each other.
And there's reports of cities changing hand numerous times, and every time there's a change in power, people are looting and destroying the city so the enemy that comes back can't take it over. It was just a dirty, godless fight to the bitter end.
Wow.
Really, really bad.
Amazing that this happens in between these moments.
So it happens among brothers, which is the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And so this is a very important set of anecdotes I'm telling you, and I'll explain to you in a second. I'll come back to this and explain to you why I'm giving you this level of detail. Not to say that the Ottomans were anything horrible. I think generally they were pretty effective during this era, as I've said. But they have an inability or a difficulty figuring out who is going to take the throne next. Okay. So finally, Mehmet I wins out. He beats all his brothers and he kills them.
So the civil war was all amongst brothers?
Every one of those is Bayezid's sons that are duking it out. But the Ummah, the civilians are suffering. Cities are being looted and destroyed so that the others doesn't get it. And they're changing over from time.
These are all Bayezid's sons. They're the ones fighting each other.
The Ottoman princes.
All the Ottoman
fighting over. So they're basically fighting over to see who gets the Ottoman throne.
Right.
So you're no longer fulfilling the mandate of a sovereign Khalif or a sultan where you protect the people and unify. You're actually creating civil war just so you guys can figure out who your leader is.
Wow.
Right? That's the sort of undercurrent here. Finally, Mehmet I wins out. He's considered the second founder of the Ottoman Empire. He's just putting out fires, so he's not able to really build, but he's very effective in unifying. So again, he's part of this great dynastic run of guys that are just very effective leaders. Mehmet I has a son named Murad, okay, named after the Sultan who was killed at the Battle of Kosovo, his dad, right? Or his great-grandfather. So Murad II goes back to being just a really scrappy, great general. He expands the lands. He's actually the one that adopts the Draculishti family. So Count Dracula is actually his adopted stepson.
Come on.
He grows up with Mehmet the Great in the same palace.
No way.
And Dracula is...
So Dracula becomes Muslim?
Dracula he never becomes Muslim. He makes being Muslim.
Oh.
But he is raised as a Muslim, so he knows everything that makes the Muslims tick. So he's the perfect guy to fight them. That's why the Ottomans have such a hard time destroying him, because he knows everything about them. He'll even do small things as withdrawing further and further back when he knows that the Ottoman supply lines are stretched. And then when they finally get to a well where there's water, he's throwing pigs in the water. Because he's not just doing anything. He's like, want a drink?
Wow.
But like this sort of middle khinzir, you know? Like, no, not in Arabic. He's not speaking Arabic, but that's what he's doing, right? He's that level of psychological warfare.
So Dracula is during this time.
Dracula is actually during Mehmed the Great's time, one generation later, but he's raised under Murad II.
Unbelievable.
So what happens is Murad II has a bunch of vassal lords because, again, he's gone back to being a powerful king. So Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, his father, is actually a vassal lord that is
Vlad the Impaler is Dracula's father.
Is Count Dracula. So Dracula's son, Vladimir the Impaler's son, is a vassal lord of Sultan Murad.
Wow.
Who betrays him once. And so Murad goes, I don't trust you anymore. So what bond of surety can you give me that I shouldn't just kill you right now, that you're going to be a faithful suzerain to me, vassal? He goes, why don't you keep my kids as a surety, and if anything happens, you can just kill them. Murad's like, done, let's do it. No person would want their sons to be killed, so that's a pretty good surety bond.
I would think that's a hell of a deal.
Not too long goes by before he betrays him again. At that point, though, as the Ottoman legend or historic record has it, Murad calls the two boys in. And Dracula at that point apparently jumps in front of his brother, Rado the Handsome. So Rado actually converts to Islam and ends up becoming the only Muslim king in Romanian history, okay? Because he's actually from Romania.
Correct.
He's called Rado the Handsome, right? Rado the blonde, because he's very fair-skinned, whatever. But he's a very handsome guy, apparently, according to Ottoman lore.
Probably because he's got blonde hair.
He steps in front of Rado and he goes, if you want to kill somebody, you can kill me. Don't kill my brother. And so reportedly, Murad looks at him, he goes, so there is some honor still left in the Draculisti family, is what he says, right?
Wow.
But he likely didn't intend to kill the kid anyway. He goes, look, I'm going to raise you as my kids. Part of it was strategic, because you raise them as vassals, as Muslims. When they go back like Rado, they'll rule as Muslims loyal to the Ottomans. That's what he's thinking.
Yeah.
But again, the Ottomans were different. You can call it pragmatism, but at least they weren't just executing and killing everybody. They were smart, but it was smart in a wholesome kind of way sometimes.
Yeah.
I can oversell it a little bit there. So Murad actually gets sick and tired of being this warrior king. He's very effective. Around 1444, he abdicates the throne to his son, who is at this point a teenager, Mehmed the Great. Brilliant, genius kid, but he's so damn brash. He has so much confidence, just like a young Kobe. He just comes in, he's like just kind of ticking everybody off. He just comes in there right off the bat. The Janissaries hate him, and the Janissaries are the special armed guard of the Sultan, his slave class that'll always protect him. They are your special forces, and for about 250 years, they are the talk of Europe. They are the elite forces, very formidable and very effective. You don't want to piss these guys off. And a lot of times, the reason why the Ottomans would have such a hard time with succession is because the Janissaries were a class unto themselves. So if one Khalif or Sultan wasn't good to the Janissaries, they would just go to his brother and be like, we're going to back you.
Oh.
So they always had issues with civil war. That caused the history. Janissaries actually destabilized because they were such a strong force.
Oh, wow.
At that time. That's what caused the destabilization.
So that loyalty was very important then.
Extremely important. But they expected it to be a two-way street.
I see that. So it wasn't just one way. I'm the Sultan. You just blind
the right sultans found ways to catalyze and parlay unilateral loyalty. Mehmed the Great, Suleiman the Magnificent. These kings were exceptional at getting people to be loyal to them, right? The ones that are less effective, they didn't get that. They didn't engender that sense of loyalty.
Amazing.
So Murad gives it up. Everybody's pissed off, including Chandarli Halil Pasha, the Grand Vizier, very famous Chandarli Halil, from a very famous family. So Chandarli Halil is instrumental in getting Mehmed removed. Because what happens is, Murad does it, and he wants to just go practice and be a Sufi and retire.
Yeah, he's done.
And then Chandrali Halil is like, your son's kind of defecating in the bed here. Can you come back? And nobody likes him. And then he's like, why? What's he doing? He goes, well, he wants to conquer Constantinople. He's like, we already tried that. He's too young to go for Constantinople. He's being stupid about it. So he kind of cajoles him into coming back in, and then he actually removes Mehmet.
Oh, so he comes back and removes him.
So he takes the throne back. By some reports,
Is that done easily? Or is that like a...
So there's different schools of thought. Some people say Mehmet was young, and then he goes, Dad, if I'm your sultan, I command you to come back and lead your armies against this rebellion. Because he was sensing that he was losing stewardship of everything. That's some reports. Other reports are his hand may have been forced by Chandrali Halil and other janissaries.
Oh, I see.
So he was, let's just say he carried a bone about those guys, and they were not going to be his guys, okay?
So he made a mental note.
He made a mental note. He took names, and he definitely he wrote that junk down, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So Murad rules until 1451, and then he dies. By now, Mehmet, the son of Murad, is 19 years old. He's a lot smarter.
Oh, so he was given the throne before 19.
And then he lost it, and then he got it back. So 1444, he gets it temporarily. His dad comes back. 1451, his dad dies, so now he has it for good. But he has this excellent case study of knowing who to use, how to deal with people, how to manage people.
Yeah, he knows it all now.
He knows it all now.
Saw it.
Exactly. So maybe we break here and we pick it up with Mehmet the Great.
Yeah,
After.
Sure, absolutely. That's a great time to break. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed this walk, like, who knew Dracula would show up today? You know what I mean? Let's just be honest. So we're going to continue next week again. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe, leave the comments. I told you Mujir is going to be checking the comments, so you make sure you're following up. You make sure, if you want to know what Dracula's favorite snacks was, I'm sure Mujir knows all about that next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.